Now, officials in Iran have handed down the death sentence to 5 people charged with the killing of a member of the security forces. It's the latest in a series of harsh sentences for anti-government protesters. Iran's rulers are facing their biggest challenge in decades after the death in police custody of a young woman in September that sparked demonstrations calling for regime change. Today marks day 3 of a nationwide strike. Shopkeepers and truck drivers have stopped work in solidarity with the movement. And Gissou Nia is the director of the Strategic Litigation Project at the global affairs think tank, the Atlantic Council. She works on prevention and accountability efforts for human rights violations. Thanks so much for joining us, Gissou. I know that you've been watching these protests closely since they began back in September. Protesters are pushing for change, but is there any reason to believe that the regime will allow any real change?
I think the protesters have been very clear about what it is that they want, and they want a full-scale change of the system. What we see right now with these execution sentences and these very draconian punishments and the torture of thousands of prisoners who are being detained is a regime that is very worried about their future prospects. And that's why we see this kind of harsh clampdown. I'm here in New York this week to meet with UN member states about the Islamic Republic of Iran's multilateral engagement at the UN, and they're very concerned about where things stand.
You've mentioned the torture, the harsh crackdown. We're hearing reports of mass arrests, people being sentenced to death. Is it possible for you and others in your line of work to track and record rights violations in Iran?
Yeah, this is a question that comes up a lot because obviously a lot of us are not given access to alleged crime scenes in country. Were we to go and do field research, we ourselves would be jailed and presumably not given access. However, there's a lot of open source information that comes out of the country in the form of videos, photos that are disseminated on social media and in chat groups, and also through virtual testimonies. So this question came up with the recent establishment of a fact-finding mission in Geneva by the Human Rights Council, and there were questions about how one could actually collect evidence if one does not have access to the country and the authorities don't consent to that. But in this day and age, there are actually a lot of ways that we can collect, preserve, and analyze evidence that don't involve access to a crime scene.
Do you think that the protest movement has enough momentum to continue despite the violence, the government crackdown that you've talked about?
Well, the thing that's very different about this spate of protests, which is now being called a revolution, is that, for example, in November 2019, when there were nationwide anti-government protests, those were quickly quelled because more than, of reports of 1,500 to even more people were killed in the space of a few days by the state. And then people didn't come out on the street again. Here we see that despite all the reports, despite the fact that there's more than 18,000 protesters in jail, despite the handing down of execution sentences, the reports of sexual assault and torture and enforced disappearance, the youth and many others are still coming to the streets. And now it's gotten to the point where workers are striking. So I think whatever has happened here cannot be pedaled back. And the Iranian authorities should be taking this very, very seriously.
Gissou Nia, human rights lawyer, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
I'm now joined by Siba Shakib. She's an Iranian-German filmmaker and writer. Now, what do you hear from Iran today? Are many people there supporting this nationwide strike?
Yes, absolutely. It's so many people and so many messages that I could fill the whole day lining up the messages that I'm getting and the phone calls that I'm getting, the interviews I do with people.
Now, 5 people have been sentenced to death for allegedly killing a member of the Basij, a paramilitary group affiliated with the country's Revolutionary Guard. What effects, do you think, do harsh verdicts like this have on the protests?
It'll just ignite them one more time. And now we are beginning to see a very soft opposition also from very close people who are very close to the regime. For instance, Ali Khamenei, the highest person in the Islamic Republic, his sister has denounced, there is no other word I can think of now, her brother, and she says he does not hear the voice of people. That's a big thing, your own sister saying that you don't hear the voice of people in your country.
Now, just a few days ago, Iranian officials announced they would abolish the country's so-called morality police. Is that just a cosmetic change, or is it a sign that the regime might be willing to allow change?
It doesn't matter anymore whether they keep it or have it or whatever they want to do with it. We don't accept anymore small changes or changes, any kind of changes. We want this regime to go, and that's it. And it's basically also no news, because the demand in the streets of Iran, in all cities, that Khamenei has to go, that Islamic Republic has to go, have been loud since weeks and weeks. So it's just a small trial of Islamic Republic to maybe convince a handful of people, but they don't. Nobody believes them anything, and nobody would say, okay, maybe now that you want to abolish the morality police, okay, you can stay. No, this is not going to happen.
Now, many people and governments across Europe and in the US, indeed, are showing solidarity with the protesters in Iran. Is that enough, or can something more be done from outside to support women's rights in Iran?
Well, first of all, until this regime is in place, until the Islamic Republic is in place, we have to try everything from outside to help the people of Iran to continue their revolution and to end the Islamic Republic. So far, a lot of things have been achieved outside Iran. 8 million Iranians outside the country are not outside the country just because they like living somewhere else. But most of us, we are outside the country because we wouldn't be able to live inside the country because our lives are threatened. And we have tried a lot, we have achieved a lot, but of course there has to be done more. And one of the things that we have been asking for and that we are fighting for is close all embassies of the Islamic Republic and send home all the employees, the diplomats, the ambassadors, and people who are close to the Islamic Republic, or put them in prison. Now that we have the United Nations Truth-Finding Commission, we have certain rights. We can put them also in prison or take them to court.
Siba Shakib there, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for being the voice, giving us a voice in the people of Iran.